The twin suns of Kepler 442b were just rising over the small human colony when Kim Dae-ho stepped out of his house to check on his tomato plants. The old man moved slowly, but his eyes were sharp as he looked across his garden. The red fruits were growing well in the alien soil, and he felt proud of what he had built. Dae-ho was 70 years old and had gray hair and wrinkled hands, but he still got up every morning at sunrise to tend his crops. He wore simple farmer clothes and walked with a slight limp from an old injury that he never talked about. The other colonists knew him as a quiet man who grew the best vegetables on the planet. The settlement of New Busan was home to about 200 humans who had come to this distant world to live peaceful lives. The houses were small and simple, made from local stone and metal. The streets were dirt paths that wound between gardens and workshops. Everyone knew everyone else, and they helped each other when needed down the street. From Dae-ho lived Park Mi-young, a small woman with kind eyes who raised space chickens. Her birds were strange-looking with blue feathers and 6 legs, but they laid eggs that tasted better than anything from Earth. Mi-young had built her chicken coops herself and spent her days talking to her birds like they were her children. The chickens made soft chirping sounds as Mi-young filled their food bowls. She had gray hair tied back in a simple bun and wore work clothes covered in chicken feathers. She hummed old songs while she worked and seemed perfectly happy with her simple life. Near the center of town, Lee Taemin ran a small repair shop from his garage. He was a thin man with oil-stained hands who could fix anything that broke. His shop was filled with spare parts and broken machines that he worked on throughout the day. The other colonists brought him their problems, and he always found a way to solve them. Taemin had a quiet way of speaking and never talked much about his past. He worked alone most of the time and seemed to enjoy the challenge of making broken things work again. His neighbors thought he was just a skilled handyman who liked to tinker with machines. The colony had other interesting people too. There was Choi Hyejin, who baked bread and cakes that smelled amazing. Her small bakery was always busy in the mornings when people came to buy fresh food. She was a plump woman with a bright smile who remembered everyone's favorite treat song. Woojin kept bees in boxes behind his house. The bees were earth bees that had adapted well to the new planet. They made honey that had a slightly different taste because of the alien flowers they visited. Woojin was a patient man who could work with the bees without getting stung. Yoon Sora made pottery in her studio near the edge of town. She shaped clay into beautiful bowls and cups that the colonists used in their homes. Her hands were always covered in clay dust, and she had a focused look when she worked at her pottery wheel. All of these people had come to New Busan for the same reason. They wanted peace and quiet after long careers back on Earth or other human worlds. They were tired of the busy life in the big cities and wanted to grow old somewhere beautiful and calm. The Galactic Council had marked their world as a peaceful agricultural settlement. This meant that other species mostly left them alone. The humans grew food and made crafts and lived simple lives under the alien stars. They had chosen this remote planet specifically because it was far from the political problems of the inner systems. Every morning the colonists would wake up and go about their daily work. Dae-ho would tend his tomatoes and other vegetables. Mi-young would take care of her chickens and collect eggs. Taemin would fix broken equipment in his shop. The bakery would fill with the smell of fresh bread, and people would gather to chat over coffee. In the evenings they would sit on their porches and watch the strange colored sunset. The sky would turn purple and orange in ways that never happened on Earth. They would share meals and tell stories and enjoy the peace. They had worked so hard to find. The colonists had built a small community, a center where they held meetings and celebrations. It was a simple building with wooden chairs and tables. They would gather there once a week to discuss any problems and plan community projects. There was also a small medical clinic run by Dr. Nam Jae-soo, who had been a surgeon before retiring to New Busan. She now treated minor injuries and illnesses and helped deliver babies when needed. The clinic was equipped with basic medical equipment and a small garden where she grew healing herbs. The colony had its own power generator that used solar panels and wind turbines to create electricity. They had water wells that tapped into underground streams. The communications array could reach other human worlds, but they rarely used it, except for emergencies. Life in New Busan moved at a slow, peaceful pace. People worked during the day and rested in the evening. Children played in the streets while adults worked in their gardens. Everyone felt safe and happy in their small corner of the galaxy. The colonists had left behind the stress and danger of their old lives. They no longer worried about deadlines or bosses or political problems. Instead, they focused on simple things, like growing food and making useful items and enjoying each other's company. But peaceful lives can change quickly when unexpected visitors arrive. In this particular morning, as Dae-ho was watering his tomato plants, he noticed something unusual in the sky. 3 dark shapes were moving across the purple dawn sky, getting bigger as they came closer. They were not the usual cargo ships that visited the colony once every few months. These ships were different. They were large and black with sharp edges and weapon ports that glinted in the sunlight. They moved in formation like military vessels, and their engines made a low threatening sound that echoed across the settlement. The colonists began to notice the ships. Mi-young looked up from her chicken coop and shaded her eyes with her hand. Taemin stepped out of his repair shop and watched the sky with a frown. Hyejin stopped kneading bread dough and came to a bakery window. The ships were getting closer, and everyone could see they were warships built for fighting, not trading. The colonists gathered in the street and pointed at the sky. Some looked worried but others seemed strangely calm as if they had seen such things before. Ho set down his watering can and walked to his fence, where he could get a better view of the approaching ships. His old eyes studied their design and formation, and something in his expression changed. He no longer looked like a simple farmer tending his garden. The 3 alien warships descended toward New Busan like dark birds of prey. Their hulls were covered in armor plating and weapon systems. They were clearly built by a species that solved problems through violence and intimidations. The ships landed in the open field outside town. Their landing thrusters burned the grass and kicked up clouds of dust. Armed figures began emerging from the ships carrying weapons that glowed with dangerous energy. The peaceful morning in New Busan was about to become something very different. The first alien to step out of the landing ships was massive and covered in dark scales that looked like armor. His species called themselves the Vextar, and they were known across the galaxy as fierce warriors who took what they wanted through force. This particular alien was Commander Kethra, and he had led many successful conquests against weaker species. Kethra stood nearly 8 feet tall with 4 arms and eyes that glowed red in the morning light. His soldiers followed behind him, carrying plasma rifles and energy weapons that hummed with deadly power. They moved in perfect formation like they had done this many times before. The Vextar had heard about the human colony from their intelligence networks. The report said New Busan was filled with old defenseless farmers who had no military protection. The aliens expected an easy victory that would give them slaves and resources for their growing empires. The alien soldiers marched toward the settlement. The human colonists did something unexpected. Instead of running away screaming or trying to hide, they simply stood in their yards and watched. Some continued working in their gardens as if armed aliens landed on their planet every day. Commander Kethra was confused by this reaction. In all his previous conquests, the local population would panic when they saw Vextar warships. They would be crying and begging in desperate attempts to contact authorities for help. But these humans acted like they were watching a mildly interesting weather event. Ho was still standing by his tomato plants when the alien commander approached him. The old man looked up from his watering and studied the massive warrior with calm eyes. He did not seem afraid or surprised, just thoughtful, like he was trying to remember something from long ago. Kethra activated his translation device and spoke in his harsh, grating voice. I am Commander Kethra of the Vextar Empire. This world now belongs to us. You will serve as our slaves or you will die. Those are your only choices. Ho listened carefully, then set down his watering can and smiled. It was not the smile of a frightened farmer, but something else entirely. Well, now that is interesting, he said in a quiet voice. You know, I used to deal with folks like you back in my working days. The alien commander tilted his massive head, confused by the old human's calm response. Where was the terror? Where was the terror? Where was the immediate surrender? These humans were acting all wrong. Ho turned toward his neighbor's house and called out in a conversational tone, Mi Young, you might want to come see this. We got visitors with attitude problems. Park. Mi Young emerged from her chicken coop, wiping her hands on her apron. She was a small, grandmother-looking woman with gray hair and kind eyes. She looked at the armed aliens surrounding her neighborhood and sighed deeply, like she was disappointed about something. What is the trouble, Ho? She asked, as if discussing the weather. These folks seem to think they can just walk onto our land and start making demands. Ho replied casually, says we are going to be slaves now. Mi Young looked at Commander Kethra and shook her head slowly. I was hoping we would never have to go back to that life, been enjoying the peace and quiet. She turned to face the alien commander directly. Son, you really should reconsider this course of action. The Vextar warriors shifted uneasily. Something felt wrong about this situation, but they could not understand what the humans showed no fear, made no attempts to run or call for help, and spoke like they held all the power in this confrontation. More colonists began gathering in the street. Lee Tae-min walked over from his repair shop, still carrying a wrench in his oil-stained hands. Choi Hai-jin came out of her bakery with flour still on her apron. Song Woo-jin left his beehives and joined the growing crowd. All of the humans looked remarkably calm for people facing an invasion force. They gathered around like neighbors meeting to discuss a community project. Some were even smiling as if they found the situation amusing rather than terrifying. Commander Kethra decided to demonstrate Vextar power by making an example. He raised his plasma rifle and aimed it at Ho, expecting the old man to beg for mercy. Instead, Ho just nodded thoughtfully. I see, he said. You are one of those types. Mi Young, you better call the others. Looks like we are going to have to dust off. The old skills, repeated Kethra. What old skills could defenseless farmers possibly have? That is where you are wrong, said Lee Tae-min, stepping forward. We do not need government permission for much of anything out here. That is rather the point of retirement, is not it? The alien commander laughed, a harsh sound that his species used to intimidate enemies. Old humans think they can threaten the mighty Vextar. You have no weapons, no army, no government backing. You are completely Hai-jin giggled like a grandmother watching children play. That is what makes this so much fun, she said. We do not have to worry about rules anymore. Song Woo-jin nodded in agreement. No more paperwork, no more asking permission, no more worrying about political consequences. If someone threatens our peaceful retirement, we can respond however we think is best. Zora approached from her pottery studio. Her hands were covered in clay, but her eyes were sharp and focused. The thing about humans is that we do not really stop being what we were just because we get old, she explained. We just get better at hiding it under hobbies and gardening. The Vextar soldiers were becoming more nervous. These humans were not acting like any conquered the population they had ever encountered. There was something in their voices and their body language that suggested hidden knowledge and capabilities. Darnam Jisoo joined the group carrying what looked like a medical bag, but the way she held it and the weight of it suggested it contained more than just healing supplies. We chose this remote world for a reason, she said quietly. We wanted to live in peace, but peace and helplessness are very different things. Commander Kethra looked around at the growing crowd of human colonists. They ranged in age from 50 to 80 years old. They wore simple work clothes and had dirt under their fingernails from honest labor. But something in their eyes suggested they were far more dangerous than they appeared. The alien commander decided to end this strange conversation with violence. He would kill the old man with the tomatoes and show these humans what happened to those who did not immediately surrender. He aimed his plasma rifle directly at Daeho's chest. That was when he made his first mistake in what would become a very educational day at the moment. Kethra's finger moved toward the trigger. Every human in the area seemed to tense slightly. It was not fear but preparation, like athletes getting ready to compete in a familiar sport. Daeho looked at the weapon pointed at him and sighed. I really was hoping to avoid this, he said, more to himself than to the alien. We were having such a nice quiet retirement. Mi-young patted some of the chickens that had gathered around her feet. Do not worry about the mess, she told them. We will clean everything up afterward. The other colonists began moving in small subtle ways that the Vextar soldiers did not immediately recognize. They were not running away or trying to hide. Instead, they were positioning themselves like pieces on a chessboard, preparing for a game they had played many times before. Commander Kethra felt a chill run down his scaled spine despite the warm morning air. Something was very wrong with this situation, but he had committed to his course of action. He tightened his grip on his weapon and prepared to fire. He was about to learn why attacking human retirement communities was considered one of the most dangerous mistakes a species could make. The moment Commander Kethra pulled the trigger, everything changed in ways that would be talked about across the galaxy for generations to come. The plasma bolt that should have killed Kim Daeho instead hit empty air because the 70-year-old man had moved faster than anyone thought possible. Daeho rolled to his left with the smooth motion of someone who had done this thousands of times before. The plasma blast scorched the ground where he had been standing, and he came up behind a large decorative rock that bordered his garden. Somehow, he now held a military-grade pulse rifle that had appeared from nowhere. Mi-young, you better take cover, he called out cheerfully. They decided to start the dance finally, Mi-young replied with obvious relief. She reached into what everyone had thought was chicken feed storage and pulled out a compact missile launcher that looked far too advanced for a simple farming colony. I was getting tired of pretending these were normal chickens. Anyway, the Vextar warriors suddenly realized that everything they had seen was wrong. Those were not garden sprinklers scattered around the settlement. They were automated defense turrets that were now swiveling to track alien targets. That was not a grain silo at the edge of town. It was a communications array that was already sending signals to hidden orbital platforms. Even the chickens seemed different now, as they scattered with purpose that suggested they were not actually chickens at all, but some kind of advanced reconnaissance drones covered in realistic feathers. Taemin's repair shop exploded outward as hidden panels slid away to reveal enough military hardware to equip a small army. Sorry about the mess, everyone, he called out as he grabbed what looked like a plasma cannon that had been disguised as a welding torch. I will clean up after we deal with our visitors. Battle that followed was not really a battle at all, but more like a professional demonstration of why you should always research your targets thoroughly. The Vextar had trained to fight other conventional armies that followed predictable tactics and rules of engagement. Instead, they found themselves facing opponents who treated warfare like a hobby they had temporarily set aside. Choi Hai Jin's bakery became a command center, where she coordinated attacks with the precision of someone who had spent decades analyzing enemy movements. The ovens that had been baking bread that morning now served as holographic displays, showing the positions of every alien soldier on the planet. Songwoo Jin's beehives opened up to release swarms of micro-drones that looked exactly like bees but carried electromagnetic pulse generators. The Vextar weapons began failing as the fake bees landed on them and discharged focused energy bursts that fried their electronics. Zora's pottery studio revealed itself as a weapons manufacturing facility where the beautiful bowls and vases had actually been explosive devices shaped like art. Her pottery wheel transformed into a launcher that sent her ceramic grenades exactly where they were needed. Darnam Jisoo's medical clinic became a tactical headquarters where she used her surgical precision to coordinate non-lethal takedowns of alien soldiers. Her medical training had taught her exactly how to disable enemies without killing them, which was much more difficult than simply shooting them. The Vextar warriors found themselves fighting an enemy that seemed to know exactly what they were going to do before they did it. Every time they tried to take cover behind buildings, the humans had already positioned themselves to cut off their escape routes. Every time they attempted To regroup, their communications were jammed by equipment that had been hidden in plain sight. Commander Kethra watched in growing horror as his elite soldiers were systematically defeated by grandparents who paused between attacks to offer each other cups of tea and comment on each other's marksmanship. The humans fought with casual competence like people who had once been very good at killing and had simply chosen to stop doing it for a while. The 3 Vextar warships in orbit discovered that the peaceful agricultural settlement had defense satellites that would have impressed the Galactic Navy weapons platforms that had been disguised as weather monitoring stations were now disabling their engines and weapon systems with surgical precision. Within 2 hours, the alien ground forces had been completely neutralized. The humans had been very careful to use non-lethal methods because, as Mi Young explained to a stunned Vextar soldier, "We are retired, not dead. We do not kill people unless we absolutely have to." Anymore, that aliens found themselves zip-tied with what they had assumed was farming cable and sitting in neat rows in the town square, while the humans went back to their daily routines as if nothing unusual had happened. Daeho returned to watering his tomatoes. Tae-min began cleaning up the equipment he had revealed. Hai-jin started a new batch of bread. Commander Kethra sat with his hands bound behind his back trying to understand what had just happened. His intelligence reports had been completely wrong. These were not defenseless farmers. They were some of the most dangerous individuals he had ever encountered. The old woman with the chickens approached him, carrying a plate of sandwiches and a thermos of coffee. "You folks must be hungry," she said kindly. "Travel always works up an appetite." "Who are you people?" Kethra demanded. "What kind of farmers have orbital defense platforms and military-grade weapons?" Mi Young sat down beside him and poured coffee into a cup. "Well, we really are farmers," she said. "I do raise chickens and Daeho grows excellent vegetables, but before we were farmers, we had different jobs. Jobs that required us to be very good at things we would rather not talk about." She handed him the coffee and continued. "We all came here because we were tired of that old life. We wanted to grow things and make things and live quietly. But just because we retired from being dangerous does not mean we forgot how to be dangerous." Other colonists gathered around to explain their situation to the confused alien commander. Dr. Jisoo had been a military surgeon who specialized in battlefield medicine. Wu Jin had been Special Forces. Song So-ra had commanded naval fleets. Hai-jin had worked in intelligence. Every single person in the settlement had backgrounds in military intelligence or technical fields that made them extremely capable. When threatened, they had come to this remote world not because they were weak but because they were too dangerous for civilized society when they were not actively restraining themselves. "The thing you need to understand," Daeho said as he joined the group, "is that humans do not really retire from being what we were. We just retire from having jobs that require us to use those skills all the time. When someone threatens our peaceful retirement, we can respond with everything we learned over decades of experience. And the best part," added Tae-min, "is that we do not have to ask permission anymore. No rules of engagement, no political considerations, no worrying about our careers if we use too much force. If someone comes to our home and threatens our families, we can deal with them however we think is appropriate." Commander Kethra looked around at the smiling humans who had just defeated his entire invasion force with what appeared to be casual effort. He was beginning to understand that he had made a very serious mistake. 3 days after the failed invasion, Commander Kethra sat in what had been the community center of New Busan, but was now serving as a temporary prison for him and his surviving soldiers. The humans had treated their wounds, fed them regular meals, and even provided entertainment in the form of old Earth movies. The Vextar commander was trying to process everything he had learned about these deceptive humans. They had completely destroyed his understanding of what retirement meant for this species. He had assumed that getting old made humans weak and helpless. Instead, he discovered it made them more dangerous because it removed all the restrictions that had been holding them back. Nam Jisoo entered the community center carrying her medical bag to check on the alien prisoners. She moved with the gentle efficiency of someone who had spent decades treating injured soldiers in battlefield conditions. Her hands were steady as she examined Vextar wounds, and her touch was surprisingly gentle for someone who had recently helped defeat an entire invasion force. "How are you feeling today, Commander?" she asked as she checked his bandaged arm. "You took quite a hit when you tried to fight Tae-min hand-to-hand." Kethra looked at the small, elderly woman who had helped coordinate the defense of the colony. "I do not understand any of this," he said. "Your people should not have been able to defeat trained Vextar warriors. We are bred for combat from birth." Jisoo smiled as she changed his bandages. "That is the problem with being bred for one thing," she explained. "We humans had to learn to be good at fighting because we were not naturally built for it. That means we had to get creative and think about better ways to do things." She finished with his medical care and sat down in a chair across from him. "The truth is, Commander, we did not want to hurt any of you more than necessary. We have all seen enough violence in our lives. We came here specifically to get away from it." "Then why did you fight back so effectively?" he asked. "Because someone threatened our families and our homes," Jisoo replied simply. "When you have spent 40 years learning how to protect people and someone comes to hurt the people you care about, all that training does not simply disappear." The humans began joining them in the community center. Daeho brought fresh vegetables from his garden. Mi Young carried a basket of eggs from her strange chickens. Hai-jin had baked cookies that smelled wonderful. Even Two alien noses, we want you to understand something important, Daeho said as he sat down. The reason we were able to defeat you so easily is not because we are naturally better warriors than your people. It is because we have had decades to think about warfare without having to actually fight wars. He gestured toward his fellow colonists. Most of us spent our careers being told when we could and could not use our skills. There were rules about appropriate force levels, political considerations, about collateral damage restrictions on what weapons we could use and when we could use them. Mi-young nodded in agreement. I designed weapons systems for 30 years, she said, but I always had to build them to meet military specifications and budget requirements. Out here I could build things exactly the way I wanted them without anyone telling me what was not allowed. The aliens were beginning to understand the true nature of their situation. They had not attacked a group of defenseless farmers. They had stumbled into a retirement community for some of humanity's most dangerous former professionals, people who had voluntarily removed themselves from active service, not because they could not do the job anymore, but because they had become too good at it. Lee Tae-min explained how he had spent years building defense systems for major worlds while having to work within government regulations and corporate policies. On New Busan, he could design and build exactly what he thought would work best without having to justify his choices to committees and bureaucrats. Song-woo Jin described his time in special forces where every mission had to be planned according to strict rules of engagement that often made the job more difficult than it needed to be. In retirement, he could respond to threats using whatever methods seemed most appropriate without filling out paperwork or attending review boards. So Ra talked about commanding naval fleets where political considerations often prevented her from using the most effective tactics available in retirement. She could plan and execute operations based purely on what would work best, rather than what would look good in reports. The pattern became clear to Commander Keth Ra. These humans had not lost their abilities when they retired. They had gained the freedom to use those abilities without restriction. They were like weapons that had been carefully controlled and regulated for decades, suddenly released from all safety mechanisms. Joy Hai-jin brought out photo albums showing pictures of the colonists in their younger days. Keth Ra saw images of Daeho in military uniform planning battle strategies, Mi-young in a laboratory working on advanced weapons systems, Tae-min constructing massive defense installations. We were all very good at our jobs, she explained, but we got tired of having those jobs. The stress of always being ready for war, the political games, the bureaucracy. We wanted to grow old peacefully and enjoy simple pleasures. But peaceful and helpless are not the same thing, added Dr. Jisoo. We chose to stop using our skills professionally. We never chose to forget them. Commander Keth Ra looked at the photo albums and then at the friendly elderly humans who had just taught his entire invasion force a lesson in humility. What happens to us now, he asked. That depends on you, Daeho replied. We could make you disappear entirely. Nobody knows you came here except your own people. We could send a message back saying your ships were destroyed by asteroid impacts or equipment failures, or you could help us prevent this from happening again. Mi-young suggested we do not want to fight anybody. We just want to live quietly and grow our food and raise our animals. If other species understand that attacking human retirement communities is a bad idea, everyone will be happier. The choice is yours, Tae-min said. You can spread the word about what you learned here and help keep the peace, or you can disappear and we will find other ways to educate people about the dangers of bothering retired humans. Commander Keth Ra realized he was being offered a chance to save face while also serving as a warning to others who might make the same mistake. He could return to Vextar space with a story that would prevent future disasters while also preserving some measure of his honor. He looked around at the humans who had defeated him so thoroughly and made his decision. I will tell my people what I learned here, he said, but I need to understand something first. How many human colonies like this one exists? The humans exchanged glances and smiled. More than you might think, said Daeho. Retirement is very popular among humans who used to have dangerous jobs. We all tend to settle in quiet places where we can pursue hobbies and gardening. Commander Keth Ra felt a chill as he realized the implications. There could be hundreds or thousands of human settlements scattered across the galaxy, all filled with former military personnel, intelligence operatives, weapons designers, and other specialists who had chosen peace but retained the ability to defend themselves with extreme prejudice. He was about to carry a warning back to his people that would change how the entire galaxy viewed human retirement communities. 6 months after the New Busan incident, the story had spread throughout the galaxy like wildfire. Commander Keth Ra had kept his word and told everyone who would listen about the danger of attacking human retirement settlements. His report had been studied by military academies across dozens of star systems. The Galactic Military Database now included a new classification for human colonies. Human retirement settlements, threat level incalculable. The entry included detailed warnings about the true nature of these seemingly peaceful communities and strongly advised against any hostile contact. Back on New Busan, life had returned to its normal peaceful rhythm. Daeho was back to tending his tomatoes, though he now had to explain to occasional visitors why some of his garden stakes were actually camouflaged sensor arrays that monitored orbital traffic. Mi-young continued raising her chickens even though everyone now knew they were sophisticated surveillance drones. Lee Tae Min had reopened his repair shop where he continued to fix broken equipment for his neighbors. The fact that he also maintained an advanced weapons manufacturing facility in his basement was simply accepted as part of retirement life on the frontier. The colony had received several interesting visitors since the incident. The Vexstar Empire had sent an official apology along with a generous compensation package for the inconvenience they had caused. They also included detailed intelligence reports about other potentially hostile species as a gesture of goodwill. Delegation from the Galactic Council had arrived to conduct a formal investigation into what they called the New Busan event. The council representatives spent 3 weeks interviewing colonists and observing daily life. They left with a much better understanding of human retirement culture. The lead investigator, Ambassador TZK, filed a report that became required reading for diplomatic personnel across the galaxy. His conclusion was simple: human retirement communities should be treated as sovereign territories inhabited by individuals whose response to threats would be limited only by their imagination and conscience. Humans were known to have very active imaginations and very flexible consciences when it came to protecting their loved ones. This made retired human colonies potentially more dangerous than active military installations. Other human settlements began reporting similar experiences. Word spread quickly through criminal and military networks that attacking human retirement colonies was approximately as intelligent as trying to rob a black hole. Species that had previously considered humans easy targets began giving their worlds much wider berth. Settlement of New Harmony reported that a pirate fleet had approached their world but turned around and left after intercepting communication signals that mentioned gardening clubs and pottery classes. The pirates apparently decided that any humans who advertised such innocent activities were probably too dangerous to bother on you. So a group of slavers had actually landed and attempted to capture colonists for the slave markets. They were found 3 days later, tied up in the town square, with a note explaining that they had been educated about the local customs and would be released after they promised to spread word about retirement settlement policies. The colony of New Jeju received a formal apology from the Krellian hegemony after Krellian scouts were discovered conducting surveillance of their farming operations. The Krellians explained that they had only been studying human agricultural techniques, but they understood why this might be considered threatening behavior. Incident reinforced the growing galactic understanding that human retirees were not to be underestimated. The phrase retired human became synonymous with hidden danger in the same way that sleeping volcano suggested potential catastrophe. Back on New Busan, the colonists were adjusting to their new reputation. Daeho found it amusing that his tomato growing had become famous throughout the galaxy as a cover for advanced weapons development. Even though he really did just grow tomatoes, he enjoyed the respect that other species now showed him. Young had started a small business selling her special eggs to alien gourmets who were curious about food from the legendary human retirement world. She found it hilarious that customers were afraid to complain about prices because they thought she might be a dangerous former spy. The colony established a small museum dedicated to the New Busan incident, featuring displays about retirement life and the importance of not judging people by their hobbies. Visitors from across the galaxy came to see the place where the peaceful farmer stereotype had been permanently destroyed. DRG Su gave lectures to medical students about the importance of understanding patient backgrounds. After treating alien diplomats who were terrified that she might have once been an assassin, even though she had been a perfectly ordinary military surgeon, her reputation had grown far beyond her actual experience. The colonists discovered that their new notoriety had unexpected benefits. Trade ships offered better prices for their agricultural products, and visiting merchants were unusually polite and helpful. Nobody wanted to risk offending people who had become galactic legends. Importantly, other species had stopped treating human settlements as potential targets. The number of pirate attacks on human colonies dropped to nearly zero as word spread about the dangers of bothering retired humans. Criminal organizations issued warnings to their members about avoiding planets with names that started with New. The Galactic Peace Corps established a new training program called Understanding Human Retirement Culture that taught young diplomats and military officers about the unique nature of human aging. Unlike other species, humans did not become less capable as they got older. They simply became less restricted in how they used their capabilities. Years later, the New Busan incident was still studied in military academies across the galaxy as a perfect example of why intelligence gathering was crucial before any military operation. The lesson was always the same: never assume that peaceful people are helpless people. The colonists of New Busan continued their quiet retirement, growing vegetables, raising animals, and pursuing their hobbies. They remained perfectly harmless right up until someone made the mistake of threatening their peace. In the end, the galaxy learned a valuable lesson about the difference between choosing not to fight and being unable to fight. Retired humans had simply removed the external restrictions that had governed their behavior during their working years. When threatened, they could respond with the full weight of decades of experience and absolutely no concern for political consequences. The universe had become a much more polite place, especially when dealing with elderly humans who claimed to be interested in gardening. After all, nobody wanted to find what other hobbies they might have hidden behind their peaceful facades and in retirement communities scattered across dozens of worlds. Former soldiers, engineers, spies, and weapons designers continued to tend their gardens and live quiet lives. They had found the peace they had been looking for, and they were prepared to defend it. With everything they had learned over long and eventful careers, the galaxy had finally learned that when humans said they were retired, they did not mean they were harmless. They meant they no longer needed anyone's permission to protect what they loved.